morning, Bright City family. It is so good to be with you all this morning and good to worship with you all. We were gone last week, and so it's exciting to be back and to be able to worship with our community.
Yeah, we miss being with you guys. Just to show you which one of us is the better pastor, the service was streaming while we were at a layover in Dallas, and so Ike was tuned in and watching and commenting, and I was passed out asleep on the couch, and so that just tells you our priorities.
Yeah, exactly.
But we're so glad to be back, and especially this weather definitely helps. I feel like I'm coming alive again with it warming up, but if you are new here, my name is Sharon. This is Ike. We are two of the pastors here at Bright City Church, and we would love to connect with you if you have not connected with us yet. And there's a few easy ways for you to do that. You can fill out the card in your cup holder, bring it to me in the lobby afterwards, or if you just want to connect virtually, just text Bright City to 94000. That will pull up a link tree. Just click new here, and we will follow up with you that way. If you have questions or just want to hear more about Bright City, something that we do after every service is called First Step. I will be in the lobby standing next to a banner, and I like to share just kind of a brief version of how we got here, who we are, why we meet in a movie theater, answer any questions that you have. And so I will be in the lobby immediately after for that. And then if you're not able to stay after this Sunday, if you've got to get going to brunch or something, next Sunday, mark your calendar, we have what is called Pizza with the Pastor. And that's something that we do once a month over at California Pizza Kitchen. It's right after the service. We just walk over there. And if you would like to go, if you can RSVP, I believe there is a link in that same. If you text Bright City to 94000, there should be a link. But also, if you sign up for our email, you'll get a link to RSVP. I had previously said, don't RSVP. It's totally fine. Come if you want. And Erica, who's on our staff, was like, please stop saying that.
Please let them RSVP.
So you can come if you haven't RSVP'd, but it really helps us to plan. And out of our great love for Erica, we want to plan ahead well. So other ways that you can get connected, one is through giving. We talk about giving at our church as an act of worship. It's not just another announcement, but it's how we tangibly demonstrate the priority of God in our lives is through giving. And there's two easy ways to do that. Again, text Bright City to 94000, or you can go to brightcitychurch.com/give and set up automatic monthly giving. Another way to get connected, but really another way that you can think about tithing is through serving. And, we at Bright City, this is not just kind of an event that we put on every Sunday, but one thing that we have discovered as God has clarified the identity of our church is that this is a place where people come not just to encounter Christ, but to experience his healing as well. And this is something that we see in Acts 2, the early church of providing for one another's needs, and it is a high calling that we take very seriously, but it is not something that Ike and I or our staff can do alone. It really is a community endeavor. And so we want to invite you, if you are not serving in the life of our church, if you are not part of that work of, building this place of refuge, of discipling, of discipling our kids, if you have not connected that way, we would really invite you to participate in the life of our church that way. And again, that link, just text Bright City 94000, or you can also find that link tree on our Instagram at Bright City RDU. So in terms of announcements, I think I only have two. One is that we are officially in the season of Lent. Who joined us for the night of worship this past Tuesday? It was amazing. It was so good. I just sat in the back of that church and just cried my eyes out. It was beautiful. But we are kicking off this season of Lent, which is the 40 days leading up to Easter. And historically, Christians have observed Lent through fasting. And during this season of Lent, we are inviting our whole church to pray and to fast together specifically about our location. Now, 2 weeks ago, I clarified that when we talk about fasting for something, it's not to extract something from God. That whenever we feel a need of any kind, that is always an invitation to greater intimacy with Jesus. And so really, as much as we really need clarity about a location for a number of different reasons, we do pray that God would answer that prayer. But more than that, our hope is that on the other side of Lent, that Bright City Church would have our ears more closely attuned to the voice of God, that we would be more intimate. And so if you have questions about what fasting can look like, it can mean fasting from a meal a day. It can mean fasting from sodas, from social media. There's so many different things where in that moment where you think, I want to drink that Diet Coke, which is actually not what I'm fasting for. I probably should. But in that moment, it kind of pings your mind to think, oh, pray for this, pray for Bright City, listen to God. So we are doing that together. Kids in Kids City are going to be praying for that. We're praying with our kids. So we just want to invite you to lean into that in this season. And then one last thing, as all of you probably know, tomorrow Durham is dropping the mask mandate. And so we're very excited. We're very excited about it. But with every decision that we've made during the pandemic, we have always sought wise counsel and submitted ourselves to it. And so we wanted you to know we haven't made an official decision, because we are talking to the doctors in our church, the experts in our church, and just making sure we are making the right decision. But we will have that announcement about what we'll be doing next Sunday within the next week or so. So that's everything.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, Sharon. Yeah, we have a board of advisors. If you aren't familiar with our advisory board, it's a group of leaders in our church, and we work with that team in making all of those decisions. So thank you, Alex, for bringing out my props for today. But yeah, so this morning we are continuing our series in 1 Samuel. We've been in this series for the last few weeks, and this first section we are calling The Rise of a Prophet. And what I want to kind of start with this morning, kind of getting us into this passage, is this common conversation that I think a lot of us find ourselves, whether intentionally or unintentionally, having. Maybe we're not even aware that we are having this conversation. But one of the conversations that we're having on social media, we're having in our family, is this question with a lot of things of, whose side is God on? Whose side is God on? And asking, whose side is God on in this? And I'm on God's side, they're not on God's side. And we do this on social media. We do this with friends, with family, all kinds of issues that are going on in our world. I mean, even with Russia and Ukraine right now, Christians are somehow dividing on this and all of that kind of stuff, and asking whose side is God on. And this morning, this question is kind of at the heart of the passage that we're going to be getting into. And really, to kind of give you one of the answers up front, part of this is that this question is a question that is below God in a lot of ways. It is a degradation of God. In a lot of ways, it's the wrong question. And this story this morning is going to kind of expose that and help us to see more clearly why this is the wrong question. What is the right question? So this morning we are in 1 Samuel chapter 5, and where we left off last week, Josh gave a wonderful message last week in talking about the Philistines and the Israelites going into war with one another. And in this story, the Israelites decide to bring the Ark of the Covenant with them into battle because they believe it's going to give them victory. It's going to give them victory over the Philistines. If you're not familiar with the Ark of the Covenant, essentially the Ark was this box that contained the 2 tablets with the 10 commandments that Moses brought down from the mountain when he went up to God and God gave him the 10 commandments. And so the Ark of the Covenant contains these 2 tablets. And so when Moses and the Israelites were wandering through the wilderness, they took this with them everywhere they went. It was thought to contain the presence of God. They had a tabernacle, which was kind of a traveling temple. And in the center of this was the Ark of the Covenant, where God's presence was thought to dwell. And so they bring this into battle with them, believing that it's going to give them some power to defeat the Philistines. Well, long story short, they end up losing the battle, and the Philistines take the ark with them. And that's where the story picks up this week. Verse 1, it says, after the Philistines had captured the ark of God, they took it from Ebenezer to Ashdod and brought it into the temple of Dagon and placed it next to his statue. So the Philistines take it to one of their cities called Ashdod, and they bring it into the temple of their god, Dagon. Now, Dagon, in trying to understand how to properly pronounce this, we were looking into this, and it seems that there's a lot of debate around how to do it. So I'm just going to say Dagon because that's what I want to call it. So we're going to say Dagon. And if you are a Hebrew scholar, we can argue later, okay? When the people of Ashdod got up early the next morning, there was Dagon fallen with his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and returned him to his place. But when they got up early the next morning, there was Dagon fallen with his face to the ground before the Lord, before the ark of the Lord. This time Dagon's head and both his hands were broken off and lying on the threshold. Only Dagon's torso remained. This story is intended to be a comedic narrative. If you find this comical, it's intended to be comical. It is intended to be funny. And so if you find it funny and laugh at it, it is supposed to be taken that way because it's supposed to border on the absurd, the absurdity of having to go in and prop their God back up. And so they go in and their God is laid over next to this ark of the Lord. They prop it back up. They go back in the next day, and not only is it fallen over, but now it's broken. Its head has fallen off. Its hands have fallen off, and they have to prop it back up. I want you to take a moment to let the absurdity of having to go in and prop your God back up sink in for a second, of how absurd it is that they would have to do that. Now, I am not usually a prop guy, a sermon prop guy, but this morning, as I was reading this story, preparing this message, I could not help but think of when you're a kid, and all of us at some point did this, playing with figurines and dolls, right? And you take them and you kind of set them up and put them in all kinds of positions, and you set them up against one another in battles or whatever, or you have dolls. This is Sadie's doll, not mine. I'm just going to... But inevitably, when you're playing with dolls or figurines, there's always that one figurine that it doesn't matter what you do, it will not stand up, right? And so you set it up, you try to twist its legs, like trying to get it set up. You're like, okay, if I can get the center of gravity just right and twist it just right, it'll stand up. And eventually you get to the point where you're so frustrated that you're like, I'm just going to prop it against something so we can get on with playing, right? And that's all I could think about with this story is they're playing dolls with their God. That they're going in and they're having to stand it back up to get it to be in its right position, and it just keeps falling back over again and again and again. The Philistines thought that they had captured Israel's God, only to go into their temple and find their God toppled over in a position of servitude in front of the ark. And they have to stand their God back up. And it says, my translation says they returned him to his place, but some translations say, and put him in his place. Their God had been put in his place. Both the Philistines and the Israelites thought that the possession of this ark would give them some supernatural advantage. That taking it into battle with them would give them an advantage. That possessing this in their temple would give them some advantage. And we read this story and we laugh like, how could they possibly worship this God? How could they possibly believe that this God was going to do anything for them when it couldn't even stand up on its own? How could they possibly worship this? But what I don't want you to miss about this story and the power of this story is understanding that this story is a physical, literal depiction of our lives. It's a physical, literal depiction of something that is happening in all of our lives, where we are propping something up, believing that if we just hold it up, if we just continue to hold it up, eventually it's going to give us everything that we ever wanted. That if we just pursue it and keep going after it, eventually it will give us everything we ever wanted. And so we keep propping it up like it's a doll. To give you an example from my life, I would say when we started planting a church, for me there was just such an immense sense of like, I'm responsible for holding this thing up, for keeping this thing going. I'm responsible for making sure this stays together. And as a part of that, what began to develop was a certain image as a pastor of having it all together, of doing it right, of always getting it right, of never messing up, of nothing ever being too much for me. But I shared a few months ago now a little bit of kind of what I went through when the pandemic hit, and just how overwhelming all of the decisions around COVID were. And were we going to survive this? And how do we manage this? And how do we make the right decisions at the right time? And walking through racial tension, and how do we do that well? And through political tension. And as we got deeper and deeper and deeper into things, I kept saying, I've just got to keep going. I've just got to keep holding this up. I've got to maintain this image of a pastor who has it together, who is just fine, who's doing just fine. But really behind the scenes, there was a sense in which this thing just kept falling over. This image just kept falling over, and I would kind of prop it back up and keep it going. And then I would turn around and go back to my business, and it would fall back over again. And to the point where it just fell over, and it felt like it crumbled, and I had to take just a month off to just rest. But I was desperate to keep this image propped up, because I believed that this image was what gave me significance. It's what gave me meaning. It gave me purpose. It was what I was here for. What in your life do you find yourself devoted to because you believe it will give you what you most want? That it will give you the sense of meaning and significance that you hope it will. But if you stopped holding it up, it would just topple right over. That this thing that's supposed to give you everything you ever wanted, that promised so much, in reality demanded so much of you in terms of keeping it going, propping it up. We think that these things are going to take us somewhere, but really they are killing us holding them up. Maybe it's the pursuit of a position at work, that next promotion, right? And you believe if I get that promotion, that's going to give me everything I ever wanted. Or if I get this promotion, it's going to set me up for the next thing. And you believe in it like it's just this God that's going to give you everything that you need, but then it demands everything of you, because if you stop for one moment, it will topple over. We do the same thing with the pursuit of wealth, believing it will give us everything we ever wanted, but it demands that we never stop pursuing it, or else it will topple over in front of us. We do this in pursuit of an appearance or a body image, of just pursuing and pursuing and seeking after that and doing, knowing that if I stop, it's going to topple over. We do this with accomplishments and success, and they just keep falling over, and we keep propping these false gods back up. And so what we are doing is we are playing dolls with God. We're playing dolls with God. And there's two ways this morning that I want to talk about how we play dolls with God. The first one is we keep propping up false gods. Like dolls, we just keep propping them up, thinking this time it's going to stand, this time it's going to stay, this time it's going to work. And really, we are just picking Dagon up and propping him against the wall again. We keep propping up false gods. Some of us, God is actively knocking your Dagons over. And my question for you is, how many times is God going to have to knock this false God, this false sense of hope, of peace, of security, of comfort? How many times is God going to have to knock it over before you realize and accept that a God you have to keep propping up is not worth devoting your life to? Maybe it's time to leave that crumbling thing just laying on the ground. And so the first way that we play dolls with God is we keep propping up false gods. The second way that we play dolls with God that we see in this narrative is that we think we possess God, that we possess the living God. The Philistines take the Ark of the Covenant, this physical representation of God's presence, and they put it in their temple and just set it up like it's another one of their gods that they now possess. And in the same way, we bring God into our lives thinking we can just set him up alongside of all the other things in our lives that we worship, all the other things in our lives that we devote ourselves to. Like it's another item to be collected, that's to be at our disposal if we ever need him. And some of us have brought God into our lives in that way and thought, yeah, that sounds like a nice thing to add to my life, something that will make my life better or make my life easier. I'm gonna bring it in and set it up next to these other things so that when they don't really work, I can just kind of pivot over and depend on God a little bit while I get everything else back in order. And you've done that. You've brought God into your life, and then you found these other things that you've been devoting your life to have toppled over. They've broken down. You've come in and they have been toppled over and are crumbling. And what God is saying is, I'm not a possession. I'm not just something that you can line up next to your other gods as if I'm just something else for you to possess. No, when I come into your life, I renovate the inside of your heart. I renovate your temple. I turn some things upside down because I'm not just another God alongside of your other gods. God is not an object for our convenience. He is not a spectacle for our entertainment. He is not a secret weapon that we can pull out whenever we need it. God is not content to be an option among other options for our attention, not an option to give some of our time to our neatly allotted time blocks. God is not content, for some of you, God is not content to be, for those that get this reference, one of our sister wives. All right, God demands all of our attention. And God demands all of our attention because he wants us to be free of all these gods that we keep having to prop up. He wants to knock them over and set them aside to give us freedom from that constant work of propping Dagons up. Josh talked last week about how Israel took the ark into battle with them, believing that it would give them victory. And the paradoxical thing about the ark is that, yes, the ark did contain a certain power. We see stories in the Old Testament where people had irreverently touched the ark and died as a result of it. And so they had developed very strict guidelines around how do you handle the ark and who can handle it and what do you have to do before you handle it, because there was a certain power that was associated with it. But the people of Israel had begun to treat it as a magical object, as if I possess this, I also possess the power of God and I can use it for my own benefit. The image that comes to mind here is the genie in the bottle in Aladdin, right? That if you possess the lamp, you possess the power of the genie, except for this time it's with unlimited wishes. I possess the lamp and therefore I possess the power of the genie, right? The phenomenal cosmic power, itty-bitty living space. And they were treating God as if he was this trinket. They had treated the ark as a magical trinket of protection. But in doing so, they forgot to take seriously that there was a living God behind this ark. That there was a living God who had his own thoughts and plans and will and desire and character that mattered. And they failed to consult the living God before they made decisions with God's ark. And so they were playing dolls with God in the sense that they possessed him and they would set him up however they wanted to give a certain appearance of we're in control. I mean, when they took the ark into the battle, the Philistines freaked out. And they were like, oh no, we're going to become like the Egyptians who were defeated by the Israelites. And they were using it as a prop for this image of power. And they were treating God like a doll. They were playing dolls with God, never thinking that this God might have his own thoughts and will and power. And so the application, I think where this plays in today is when we think we possess God, we treat God's name like they treated the ark at that time. We treat God's name like they treated the ark, meaning we forget that there is a living God behind God's name, and so we put God's name on things that God doesn't want his name put on. We put God's name on things without ever asking God if he wants his name on it or not. And so in these battles of whose side is God on, we never think to ask, God, whose side? What's your voice in this? We just assume we're on God's side, that God's on our side. We never ask the question of where is God actually in this? What is God up to in this? Where does this align in his scriptures? And we set God up like an action figure who has no opinion about what we do with him. We enlist God in support of our plans and our agendas because it's good leverage, or because it gives an appearance, or it sounds Christian. But quite frankly, this happens because we have no fear of the repercussions of misusing God's name, of abusing his name, of putting it on things he doesn't want it put on. We don't take seriously enough to ask God if he wants his name associated with it. And so we ask God to bless things in our lives without ever asking if it is something he wants to bless. We pray for things in our lives to work out and never ask if it's something that he wants to work out. We make foolish decisions and then ask God to rescue us from our consequences. And then we get mad when God doesn't rescue us, like he's abandoned us because he let us experience the consequences of our own foolish decisions. And so at some point, the divine-human relationship becomes inverted. And we might not put it this way, but unconsciously, we have moved to a place where God is now beholden to us, where he answers to us. And so this morning, we come to a point in our study of 1 Samuel where some folks had lost the seriousness of this living God with his own thoughts and desires and plans. And so we read on in chapter 5 of what happens in the following of this incident in the temple. 1 Samuel 5, 6 through 9 says, "The Lord's hand was heavy on the people of Ashdod, this Philistine city. He terrified the people of Ashdod and its territory and afflicted them with tumors. When the people of Ashdod saw what was happening, they said, 'The ark of Israel's God must not stay here with us, because his hand is strongly against us and our God, Dagon.' So they called all the Philistine rulers together and asked, 'What should we do with the ark of Israel's God?' 'The ark of Israel's God should be moved to Gath,' they replied. So they moved the ark of Israel's God. After they had moved it, the Lord's hand was against the city of Gath, causing a great panic. He afflicted the people of the city, from the youngest to the oldest, with an outbreak of tumors." So these Philistines decide that this cannot stay in our city. The people of Ashdod say, this cannot stay in our city. And so they send it off to another Philistine city. And when it gets there, because they are treating it as something they possess, then these tumors outbreak, these plagues break out. And so it becomes this hot potato that they now pass from Philistine city to Philistine city, and they end up passing it to 5 cities before somebody just finally says, let's just send it back to Israel. Just send it back to them. We don't want it. This thing that was supposed to be a secret weapon is backfiring on us. Send it back to Israel. And so moving into chapter 6, kind of jumping ahead here, this is what happens when they send it back. Verse 13, it says, "The people of Beth-Shemesh were harvesting wheat in the valley. And when they looked up and saw the ark, they were overjoyed to see it. The cart came to the field of Joshua of Beth-Shemesh and stopped there near a large rock. The people of the city chopped up the cart. The Philistines had put it in a cart that was pulled by 2 cows and sent it back. They chopped up the cart and offered the cows as a burnt offering to the Lord. The Levites removed the ark of the Lord, along with the box containing the gold objects, and placed them on the large rock. That day, the people of Beth-Shemesh offered burnt offerings and made sacrifices to the Lord. When the 5 Philistine rulers observed this, they returned to Ekron that same day." So the Ark of the Covenant comes back. The people rejoice and celebrate. They make an offering and sacrifice to the Lord for him coming back, for his ark coming back. But what I don't want you to miss is that when the ark came back to God, what you need to see is that God did not need Israel to bring him home. God did not need Israel to come and rescue him as if he were some action figure that could not function for himself. God said, "I can take care of myself. Thank you very much. I can speak for myself. Thank you very much. I don't need you to come and rescue me." And this is good news for us. This is good news because a God who needs you is not a God who can save you. God was not a doll in need of our rescue. He was not a possession in need of an owner. God was demonstrating that he did not need us. Now, that doesn't mean he doesn't want us, but he did not need us. God, in demonstrating this, was showing his people that he was not dependent on them for his rescue. And as a result of that, of setting people free from the delusion of possessing God, he also wanted to set his people free from lives of propping up Dagons. Because if God's ark in a temple with a false god can come home, surely he can knock over the false gods in our lives as well. And so in Jesus, what God did is he bought your life and mine, bought us from lives of having to prop up Dagons. In Jesus, God bought your life and mine. Humanity had been claimed by the tyranny of toil, of evil and pain, the tyranny of despair, of hopelessness, of constantly propping up false gods. Jesus stepped in to say, I have come to give my life as a ransom for many. He bought your life back. And God so wanted you to be free of the Dagons that rule your life, that weigh you down, that wear you out, that steal your hope, that he bought your life with his own, an eternal exchange so that you could now live in a reality that is free from having to hold up the false gods and the Dagons in your life. But when he bought us, that means we become his possession. He is not ours. We serve him. He doesn't serve us. Not in this way of he's here to make all our dreams come true. He set us free from the false image of possessing God and propping up false gods. Can you imagine being free of devotion to propping up a certain image? Can you imagine being free of the devotion to propping up a level of success or a physical appearance? I'm going to apologize for this in advance, but I think it's going to help you remember this. Don't you want to be free of these Dagon things? That's really why I wanted to call it Dagon. Thanks. This morning, what I want to invite you to let those things fall. To stop propping them up. Stop believing the false promises that they offer. To let them fall and to let them crumble. To let them fall because you belong to the family of God. You are a possession of God's. He has bought you back from slavery to the Dagons in our lives, and he has made you a child of God. This morning, I want to create some space for you to reflect on what images you find yourself propping up. The false gods you find yourself coming back to again and again, propping up, and it just won't stay up. I want to invite you to bow your head. God, this morning we come before you reading this comical story. God, a story that borders on the absurd. And yet, God, I ask that even in its absurdity, we would see in our own lives the false gods that we keep propping up. God, the ways that we play dolls with you, believing that we possess you in some way. God, that we own your name, and that it is something to be leveraged for our own plans and our own agendas. And God, may this morning we rise above this question of whose side are you on, believing that we speak for you. God, would you speak for yourself this morning? Would you speak for yourself to pinpoint in our hearts where the false gods are? Where the things are in our lives that are not in alignment with you, that are not in alignment with who you call us to be. God, may your Spirit come into our lives, your Spirit that will not just be set up next to the other false gods in our lives and the other idols in our lives, but God demands a renovation of our lives and our hearts. God, may your Spirit come into us this morning and do that work of renovating our hearts, renovating our desires. God, would you set us free? Would you set us free from all of this and experience the freedom of being your children, of being your possession? God, I pray over the people here this morning that maybe they came in carrying all kinds of Dagons this morning, brought them with them into this room, sitting on their shoulders. God, may this morning they just set them down. Just set them down, lay them on the floor, let it fall over and crumble, and leave this space lighter. Lighter because they're now walking in the freedom that comes from being your child. May it be so in Jesus' name.